Go ahead and start. I'd like to welcome everybody back for our next presentation, which is Nature's Marvels, Creatures that Defy Evolutionary Theory. Now, for those who go to the Origins, the Evidence series, I always tell people that the first two presentations, the one on outer space and the one on DNA and proteins, those are the most technical. I mean, it may bring back traumatic memories from college classes. I remember sitting in college listening to my professor or going through textbooks on this stuff. But as we continue through this series, it's going to get more and more exciting. This one is one that I think people of all ages, children including, really enjoy. We're going to go through all of the animals in our world, many of the animals in our world that disprove the evolutionary theory. And before we begin, we also want to start with prayer. Shall we do that together? Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for the privilege that is ours to come back once more. Give us sharp minds, clear minds to be able to look at this new topic and understand that there is a God who created all things. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So as you've seen in this seminar, it answers some of life's deepest questions. Questions that lie at the intersection of faith and science. Questions like, does God exist? Where did life come from? And is evolution true? Now, when we looked at the God code, Darwin's dilemma was explaining the first life from chemicals. Proteins are the necessary building blocks of life. If you're going to have life, you first have to describe how proteins come from non-living things. The problem is there isn't enough time for a single protein to form from chemicals. Instead, the only way that proteins are formed, the only way that science has ever observed proteins being formed, whether it's protein synthesis in a single-celled organism or the protein synthesis in a multicellular organism like an elephant, any life form, every life form creates proteins the exact same way. You open up a single cell piece of bacteria and you're going to see that proteins are formed in that bacteria the same way they're forming in your body today. There's only one way, and it's through the information in DNA. DNA is required to build proteins. And when you look at DNA, you see that DNA is written like a college textbook. I mean, it contains mountains of information. And information only comes from intelligent sources. Never comes through random chance. Whenever we see something that looks orderly and sequenced, in something with information, we automatically know that came from an intelligent mind. So in this presentation, we're going to dive deeper into the evidence that shows evolution is a theory in crisis. We're going to work our way up through the evolutionary tree, looking at the evidence in insects, birds, lizards, mammals, and humans to discover amazing things your science textbook won't tell you. And we'll also look at some shocking lies that are included in science textbooks today. We start our journey at Darwin's evolutionary tree of life. Now, what is this tree? Here are the basics. Darwin believed that all branches of life on Earth eventually lead back to one common ancestor. He taught that all life is related and evolves from a lower form up to a higher form of life. And that's how evolution pictures life. As opposed to this, intelligent design does not see one single tree of life. Instead, intelligent design sees what we would call an orchard. Does anybody have an orchard at your house? Yes. Okay. In an orchard, you can have a pear tree over here, an apple tree over here, a cherry, plum. I probably shouldn't say coconut. And I definitely won't say pineapple because pineapple doesn't grow on trees. But in an orchard, you have many different trees. Each tree is distinct. And so, in intelligent design, you have an orchard of life. There are distinct kinds, and that's an important term, a distinct kind of life that can produce variety within its kind. But it cannot transform from one kind to another kind. You know, I grew up in the pear capital of the world, Medford, Oregon. And there are like tons of different kinds of pears. Now, if you grew up in like South America, where you don't have stone fruit, you think, oh, there's only one type of pear. But when you grow up in Southern Oregon or in the northern parts of the U.S., you know that there's all sorts of different pears. You know, there's Bosque pears. Name some other pears. There you go. All of them at once. Now, if you talk to people who live in North America, you ask them, how many varieties of bananas are there? And they'll say, oh, there's just one banana. And then you say that around a Filipino or somebody like a Brazilian, and they say, one banana, you ignorant American. There's tons of bananas. Now, I don't know all the different types of bananas, but you're never going to get a banana turning into a pear. Each thing stays within its kind, right? And that's the idea of intelligent design. You have the kind of dogs. You have many different variety of dogs. As we discovered, you even have hairless dogs. You have many different types of primates. You have many different variety of humans, but each one remains within its box. There's limits to how much variety you can have. You're never going to have a dog-ate or a pug. You're going to have primates, dogs, cats. They're each going to remain within their kind. And that's the idea of an orchard. And this matches with what the Bible says. Let's read it together. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind. Do you see that? According to its kind. God made each creature according to its kind. Doesn't mean that within its kind there can't be variety. There can be black dogs, there can be white dogs, there can be brown dogs, there can be spotted dogs, there can be all sorts of different dogs, but it's always going to be in its kind a dog. For intelligent design to work, here are the things that you need. If you're testing, you need evidence of instant creation. You can't have long time in order to form life. Life has to be explained as being instantaneously created. Another thing that you need is boundaries. You should be able to see boundaries within kinds. So you should never see in science a rabbit turning into a cat or a cat turning into a camel. Like, there should be boundaries, and that should be evident if intelligent design is true. Adaptation and variety should be observed, but observed within limits. You should be able to see complexity. Irreducible complexity should be observed. And there should be evidence of design. Organisms should display designed attributes. What are the limits of evolutionary theory? Now listen to the limits Darwin himself placed on his theory. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Natural selection, he continued, natural selection acts only by taking advantage of slight successive variations. She can never take a great and sudden leap, but must advance by what? Short and sure, though what? Slow steps. It has to happen that way. Natural selection is scrutinizing the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, and preserving and adding up all those that are good. And what's the difference between a good variation and a bad variation in evolution? The bad ones are the mutations that kill you. The good ones are the mutations that you live through. And the reason why those are counted good is because those are the only ones that you can pass on to your children or to your children's children. Those are the only ones that actually survive evolution. So in order for evolution to work, here's what you need. First, you need something called deep time. You need lots and lots and lots of time to have gradual change, and enough gradual change to produce a new species from simpler ones. The next thing you need is baby steps. Only slight modifications are allowed. Any sudden leaps or rapid changes are not allowed in evolutionary theory. Every system should be able to be explained through many, slow, small, tiny steps. And the third thing you need is life, which is evident. You can't have whatever is changing die on you, because then it won't pass on its changes. So it has to change and continue to live. It can't change and then die without passing on its changes. And then the third thing is it has to be able to reproduce itself. If it can't reproduce itself, the organism cannot continue to change. So now that we know what we need for either evolution or creation to be valid, let's look at the animal kingdom and see what we can observe. And we're going to start with the simplest creature of all, the single-celled organism called bacteria. Now, bacteria is a perfect place to start for our discussion, because bacteria should, of all things, bacteria should prove evolution true. Why? Well, evolution depends upon slight changes or mutations in the genes of organisms over many, many, many generations. Bacteria is unique in that it can reproduce every 20 to 30 minutes. So you could see the effects of repeated mutations over literally thousands of generations and compare later generations to early generation bacteria, and you should be able to see evolution in progress. Every 30 minutes you get a new generation. Every 20 to 30 minutes, a new bacteria forming. So Michigan State University evolutionary biologist Richard Linsky and his colleagues searched for signs of evolution in bacteria for 20 years. They tracked 40,000 generations. What were the results? Total failure. The end product bacteria was degenerated from the original bacteria, but there was no change in any new bacteria that could be accomplished over how many generations? 40,000 generations. The mutation simply left the bacteria damaged or dead. Alan Linton of the University of Bristol, emeritus professor of bacteriology, said, "Throughout 150 years of the science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria has changed into another, in spite of the fact that populations have been exposed to potent chemicals and physical mutagens, and that uniquely bacteria possess extra-chromosomal transmissible plasmids. Since there is no evidence for species change between the simplest forms of unicellular life, it's not surprising that there is no evidence for evolution throughout the whole array of higher multicellular organisms. If you were going to see evolution work, you would see it in bacteria. And they've tried and tried, and they couldn't come up with anything. What we will see is that bacteria is a sample of what you see the entire way up the evolutionary tree. Here's another example. One machine in bacteria that seems to defy evolution is the bacterium flagellar motor. Howard Burge has labeled this cellular machine as the most efficient motor in the universe. It's a little whip on the back of this cell, and that little whip spins. It spins at 10,000 RPMs. And although it is spinning that fast, it can stop within a quarter of a turn, shift, and instantly start spinning at that high revolution again. How fast? How many RPMs does your car run at? Okay, let's say you're full throttle. It's like 6,000 maybe. I mean, you're redlining at 5,000 to 6,000. This flagellar motor is spinning at double that rate. 10,000 rotations. And not only that, did you catch? It can stop within a quarter of a turn. Quarter of a turn is from here to here. Like literally 10,000, and it just goes, and it's able to change directions and go again. That's precision. That's amazing. There are 40 different protein parts that all must function together in order for this little thing to work. Now, how could the motor build gradually, piece by piece over time? This is what you call irreducible complexity. Remember, evolution says baby steps. You need one little piece at a time, and each little piece must create an advantage to that cellular organism. If you have 40 different pieces, all of those pieces have to be together at once in order to have any advantage at all. Any single piece on its own produces no advantage for that little cell. Zero. So how can you build this system gradually when you need all the parts at once in order for it to work? It's highly unlikely that evolution would see any advantage to this and keep it for the organism. Charles Darwin says natural selection is scrutinizing the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, preserving and adding up all that are good. So we can see that even within single-celled organisms, there are huge problems that an evolutionary model cannot explain. So let's move up a little bit. What's the next level up from a bacteria? Any guesses? Fruit flies. Yes, the fruit fly. And the fruit fly gives us a very unique opportunity to test evolution once again. And the reason is because fruit flies proliferate very, very quickly. In 1980, this search for proof of the theory of evolution led researchers to painstakingly and purposefully mutate each core gene involved in fruit fly development. The authors won a Nobel Prize in 1995 for their work showing mutations could affect specific body parts. In other words, they got like a fruit fly wing to grow out of its head or a leg to grow on its back. But notice that they never got a fruit fly to grow a horn like a rhinoceros or some other novel thing that the fruit fly never had before. And here's the reason. Because as we talked about in the previous lecture, genetic mutations only destroy or modify information that's what? Already there. It can never add new information. So although you may be able to rearrange the legs and wings of a fruit fly through genetic mutations, you'll never be able to produce anything other than a damaged or deformed fruit fly. And that's what they found. All of the mutations only formed in dead or deformed fruit flies. Creatures have limits to how far they can mutate. Another marvel of nature is butterflies. Butterflies are amazing creatures not only in the way they fly or how beautiful their wing patterns are, but in how they reproduce. Reproduction is a necessary element to evolution, remember. Without reproduction, evolution can't work. The butterfly presents a unique challenge to evolution. The reproduction of a butterfly begins with the laying of an egg. The eggs aren't just laid anywhere. Butterflies only lay their eggs on what's called a host plant that their young will feed on exclusively. In the case of monarch butterflies, how many of you have seen monarch butterflies? And what do the caterpillars exclusively eat? Milkweed. Now, the butterfly doesn't eat milkweed. It is only its babies that eat the milkweed. So what will a butterfly do? Well, they will come to a plant, like a milkweed plant, and you'll see the butterfly flying in circles around the milkweed. Do you know what it's doing? It's measuring the leaves of the plant to make sure that this is the right plant where it should lay its eggs. Then the butterfly will land on the leaves, and it will begin bouncing its legs up and down, drumming the leaves to try and feel to make sure, is this the right plant? Is it just the one I need? Then it will take its tongue, which is called a proboscis, and it will stick the tongue out, and it will lick the leaf and taste the leaf to make sure, does it taste right? Does it look right? Is it the right size? And only then will the butterfly then lay its egg underneath the bottom of this correct plant. If it lays its eggs on the wrong plant, the young caterpillar will die. They won't survive on any other plant. Butterflies find those plants by first focusing on the shape, and then they drum the leaves, and then they taste the leaves, and then they use their antennas to smell the leaves. And when they are sure they've gotten it right, the butterfly will lay eggs on one of the leaves. Now, once the egg hatches, a caterpillar comes out and immediately begins to eat. Those caterpillars eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. It will eat its own body weight in food each day. It will multiply its birth weight 3,000 times in 2 weeks. Imagine if your babies did that. That's a big baby. The skin of a caterpillar can stretch. The skin of a caterpillar is waterproof, and it can be shed to accommodate its rapid growth. All of this is part of design. If any one of these features, it doesn't have the right stretchy skin, it doesn't have waterproof skin, it doesn't have any of these things to accommodate its rapid growth, that caterpillar will dry out, and it can't continue to live and grow and produce. It will die. And that ends evolution right there. Caterpillars have 2 types of cells in their body. They have larval cells, which make up their internal organs, and then they have another group of cells called imaginal cells, which eventually will be used by caterpillars to reconstruct its body into a butterfly. Those imaginal cells just lie dormant inside the caterpillar, and they're not used until the caterpillar goes into its cocoon phase. So it has this entire new body plan already in its body, unused, just lying dormant. So these 2 different cells contain those 2 body plans needed for the survival of this one insect. One plan that takes it from egg to caterpillar, and then a totally separate body plan that takes it from caterpillar to butterfly. Now, at some point, the caterpillar knows that it's time to begin its most dramatic transformation. The caterpillar finds a spot, spins a little anchor on the bottom of a leaf or branch, and then it attaches itself to this little anchor and hangs upside down. Meanwhile, its body pumps a fluid into its skin that splits the caterpillar's skin all the way down and forms a cocoon that is known as a chrysalis. Now, what happens in the chrysalis? The most amazing transformation on this entire planet. The caterpillar turns into a butterfly, but the change is dramatic. Caterpillars are earthbound. Butterflies can fly. Caterpillars eat leaves. Butterflies feed off of nectar. Caterpillars have large bodies. Butterflies have slender bodies. Caterpillars have limited vision and smell. Butterflies have exceptional vision and smell and can navigate and fly 50 miles in a day. The caterpillar and the butterfly are completely different creatures. Now, what happens inside the chrysalis? Well, that little caterpillar, once he's inside the chrysalis, doesn't really do anything. He just kind of hangs out, and a genetic code activates inside the chrysalis, and that genetic code begins to direct that the cells of the caterpillar begin to break down. You know those cells that make up the caterpillar's body, they begin to break down, and he's turned into literally soup inside of that chrysalis. And after he's turned to soup, remember, there is nothing in the caterpillar's anatomical structure that can survive. All of it has to be destroyed in order for there to be a butterfly. So it first goes through destruction. Everything is destroyed. It becomes cellular soup. And then it begins rebuilding every little piece that is needed for a completely new animal to come out. Isn't that incredible? Absolutely amazing. And what comes out doesn't even resemble the caterpillar that went in. To me, this is the perfect picture of what Jesus does in the life of every person. When you come to Him as one person. But when you've finally met Him, you leave a different person. And this is what happens with a caterpillar and a butterfly. Now, you can't destroy every cell. You can only destroy specific cells. You can't have random cell death. There are some cells that need to stay and others that need to go. It's a very specific information-guided process, not random chance. If you get the wrong cells destroyed, the only thing that's coming out of that cocoon is soup. You have to get the wings perfect. You have to get the long, slender legs perfect. You have to get the eyes perfect. You have to get the tongue perfect. And you know, the tongue is a marvel. When the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, its tongue is like a straw that's been split in half. You'll see a butterfly, it will do several things when it first comes out of its cocoon. The first thing it will do is it will hang on its cocoon and it will kind of spread its wings and close its wings. Do you know what it's doing? It's pumping fluid into its wings so that its wings can stretch out and it can fly. While it's doing that, you'll see the butterfly will also be sticking its tongue in and out, in and out. And the reason it's sticking its tongue in and out, it's called a proboscis. That tongue is split in two, and the butterfly has to connect the two halves of the tongue perfectly so that it makes a perfect tube. Have you ever tried to drink out of a straw that's broken? I can't drink anything. All I get is air bubbles. And that's what would have happened to the butterfly if it doesn't get its tongue perfectly together. It would starve to death and it would not be able to live. All of these processes have to come into play. All of them have to be together. You don't have time to make a mistake. One single mistake in the process, you don't have a butterfly and you don't have reproduction. Evolution cannot describe how you get from an egg to a caterpillar to a butterfly, because at every one of those stages you have 1,000 different ways that butterfly could not make it. There's no way that random chance could explain all of this. In order for natural selection to work, an organism has to be able to reproduce itself. Caterpillars cannot reproduce unless they make it to the butterfly stage. In between a caterpillar and a butterfly is the death coffin, the cocoon, where nearly everything about a caterpillar is destroyed. That destruction has to happen because the butterfly is so radically different. But unless the caterpillar can make it through this cocoon stage on the first try perfectly, it will not survive to pass on its information to its offspring. Unless a caterpillar has the full genetic instructions needed from the very beginning, you will never get a butterfly. Nothing about this transformation fits evolution. You can't have long periods of time to try and retry to make a butterfly, because death will be the result. As we looked at before, life is a necessary ingredient for evolution to work. Reproduction is also necessary, and caterpillars can't reproduce. Slight modifications would only result in the death of a butterfly. However, in the intelligent design model, if a butterfly was instantly... If a butterfly was instantly created with all the genetic information it needed, it could transition smoothly from caterpillar to butterfly the first try around. We see what's called irreducible what? Complexity in the cocoon stage. We see evidence of design in the whole process. It doesn't resemble randomness or blind chance at all. A caterpillar can undergo radical change. However, that change is confined within the boundaries of what is programmed in its cells. You'll never have a horse coming out of a cocoon. Never. You'll never have a monkey bursting out of a cocoon. You will only have a butterfly. Why? Why? Exactly. Because the genetic information is there from the beginning. You can't add new genetic information. It was programmed that way. And programs are written by programmers. And there's a divine programmer who said, I want in my world a butterfly, and I want to just confound evolutionists for eternity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an egg that turns into a caterpillar, that turns into a butterfly, and they'll never be able to explain it through any other theory other than intelligent design. That's a butterfly. You know another thing about butterflies? Metamorphosis is the only example on earth of one creature transforming into a completely new creature. That is what evolution is trying to do. Evolution is trying to take one creature, change it into another, and the only one that can do that is the one that was programmed to do that by God. Unlike evolution, metamorphosis does not happen over millions of years. It happens in a few days. A new creature with a completely new body structure, new food source, and new capabilities is formed from another creature, not through slow, slight modifications, but through a rapid and gigantic leap. Butterflies show us that this is only possible if the information for that change is pre-programmed into the DNA of the creature. Now, one final way that butterflies defy evolution are their migration patterns. Remember we talked about monarch butterflies? These creatures are absolutely amazing. Monarch butterflies go on a migration every year. So many monarch butterflies, they'll migrate all the way up to, from Mexico all the way up to Texas. And there they'll lay their eggs, and their eggs will hatch, and those butterflies will die. And so the next generation of butterflies, that's the second generation, hatches in Texas. And they make their way up to the northeastern part of the United States where they lay their eggs. Their eggs hatch into caterpillars. The second generation dies, and the third generation now becomes butterflies. Remember, we're on generation number 3. They migrate up to Canada. And by the end of the summer, they're laying their eggs up there in Canada, and the third generation dies in Canada. We're now on the 4th generation that is born here in Canada. And that 4th generation becomes butterflies. And that 4th generation before winter says, we need to migrate south. And so that 4th generation is called the super generation because they outlive every other generation before them. They migrate all the way from Canada straight back down to one specific valley in Mexico where all monarch butterflies winter over the winter. All of them. How did that generation know where to go? How did they know to go south rather than north? South rather than east or west? How did they know where in Mexico to go? They've never been there before. They're 4 generations late. Another thing that's interesting is that this generation, remember the other 3 generations, they lasted a few months and then they died. The 4th generation migrates all the way down to Mexico, survives the entire winter in Mexico, then migrates up to Texas, lays their eggs, and then they die. How does that happen? It is the genetic instructions that are coded in these butterflies. Evolution can't explain this. But creation can. Every year, you have this massive fall migration. The next animal is called the bombardier beetle. It's only a half an inch long. It's a tiny little thing. And what makes this beetle so amazing is it's able to mix 2 chemicals called hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide into a special little chamber in its rear area. And that chamber, there's a catalyst that turns the 2 chemicals into benzoquinone. And benzoquinone superheats the liquid to a boiling point. This increases pressure in the little beetle's rear chamber, and the beetle can now fire in any direction. It actually has these 2 cannons on its back end. Those cannons can turn, and it can fire to the right, to the left. It can fire behind itself. And this is how it propels itself to get away from whatever's trying to eat it and disorients whatever is trying to eat it. Multiple explosions allow the bug to hang on while it's firing. So they did some testing on this little bombardier beetle, and they did slow-mo cameras on its firing. They used to think that the explosion was so big, why doesn't this beetle just rocket out of here? Well, they slowed everything down, and they realized that the bombardier beetle actually lets out 3 explosions in sequence. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. And it's those 3 rapid explosions that keep it from, rather than one big explosion, that keep it from being rocketed out of there. So here's the bombardier beetle's dilemma. The beetle is irreducibly complex. You need both chemicals, a firing chamber, and an exit to have a working defense mechanism. If you have both chemicals, a firing chamber, but no exit, that's a problem. If you have both chemicals, but no firing chamber, you're not going to be able to mix the 2 chemicals together. Everything has to be there at once, or the beetle has no way of defending itself. If you evolve only one chemical, it's useless. If you evolve both chemicals but no exit, the beetle kills himself with a boiling reaction. The mechanism appears fully designed instantly. Now this is one creature I absolutely love. How many of you have ever seen fireflies? Aren't they beautiful? You know, like bananas, there's many different varieties of fireflies. There's fireflies that all blink randomly. We see those in Tennessee and other places. You'll see these sorts of fireflies in fields, but in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a specific type of firefly, and let me see if I have the name of it. Well, the simple term for this firefly is they're called synchronous fireflies. And they're not usually found in fields, they're found in forests. And the synchronous fireflies, you also find them in Asia. These synchronous fireflies have a way of signaling one another so that they all turn their lights on at the same time and then turn their lights off at the same time. It's weird. Like my wife's aunt, she has a place in Tennessee, and there in her forest, you walk in her little forest, you're standing there, and all of a sudden, boom, all the lights are on. And then boom, all the lights are off. You're like, what just happened? Those are synchronous fireflies. How do they communicate with one another? It's a marvel of creation. It happens every year between May and June. When the temperature and moisture is just right, these fireflies will blink their bright lights completely in sync with one another. In Asia, another species of firefly will all fly into a tree and then turn on their lights together at precisely the same moment. Try to get 100 people to all turn on their flashlights at exactly the same moment. There's just no way you can do it unless the information is already there in your genes. Another marvel of creation is the chicken egg. Chicken eggs are a wonder in and of themselves. Did you know that a chicken egg has 10,000 little holes in its shell? And that's why when you boil an egg, you see all those bubbles coming out of its shell. Now those holes are so that the baby chick can breathe, and it also allows it to remove waste from the shell. If the shell doesn't empty the waste quick enough, then the chick will die. If there isn't enough oxygen, the chick will die. And you know, those little holes on the inside of the shell, there's a membrane that's formed so that what ends up happening is all of the bacteria and pathogens from the outside world cannot get in and infect the chick. It's in a sterile environment. And yet, oxygen can get in, and it's transferred through that membrane to the little chick. Perfectly designed. Chicken eggs are also designed perfectly round. You know, we have a number of chickens, and I always wonder, you watch these chickens, they're sitting on their eggs, and then you see them like do a little dance like this, and they're turning their eggs, but sometimes if you look underneath, they're actually stepping on top of their eggs. Have you ever wondered why those eggs don't crack? It's because they're just hard enough that they can withstand the pressure of their mother's feet stepping on them and laying on them, and yet it's not so hard that a baby chick can't crack its way out. It's hard enough to protect it, and yet not so hard that a baby can't hatch. It's perfectly designed. And it had to be that way from the very first egg. Now on day 5, the chick has formed blood vessels. 2 of the vessels connect to the membrane on the inside of the shell, which transfers oxygen from the little holes called pores to the arteries of the newly forming chick. On day 19, the chick forms a little tooth on top of its beak, and that tooth, right there, is so that it can poke a little air sac located at the very bottom of the egg. From the moment it pokes into the air sac, it has enough oxygen to last for only 6 hours. It will poke this air sac exactly on day 21, and it must break through the shell or it will die from lack of oxygen. Now, if that baby chick had to evolve, how could the chick evolve a tooth and the first time hit the air sac and know it only had 6 hours? It needs the tiny holes in the shell. It needs the blood vessels, the air, the sac, the little egg tooth, all the first time, or it is formed, or it will die. If the egg evolves pores but nothing else, the chick will die of lack of oxygen before it hatches. If the blood vessels reach the shell but no air sac is formed, or it doesn't have a tooth to break the sac, it will die. Everything needs to be in place the first time for that little chick to survive, and this could only happen through intelligent design. A number of years ago, I was in Australia, and I ran across one of these little creatures. You know what it is? It's called a bush turkey, also known as an Australian incubator bird. Now, they aren't big. The females are only 3 to 4 pounds. However, they lay big eggs for their size. The female will lay 1 egg every 3 days for 7 months. Each egg is half a pound. Now, the male bush turkey is the one responsible for constructing the nest. He has to build the nest to the exact specifications of the female turkey. It has to be 50 feet wide, 20 feet deep. The female will check out the nest, and if she doesn't like it, she somehow tells him, build another nest. Thanks, dear. I'll build another nest, even though this took me 6 months. Once the female is satisfied, she'll say, okay, and she'll lay her eggs in that nest. And those eggs are, like I said, massive. This egg has a thick shell with pores, and each one of the pores in this egg are shaped like an ice cream cone. So you've got really, really tiny holes on the very inner side of the shell and really big holes on the outside of the shell. And there's a reason for that. We're going to get to that. Each hole is large at the top, tapers down to a smaller hole on the inner portion of the shell. The ice cream cone-shaped pores are for a reason. As the baby grows in the egg, it scrapes the inside layer of the shell, wearing it down. And as it does, the pores get bigger and bigger, letting more and more oxygen in as it continues to grow. And it needs more oxygen for that baby bird to continue to grow. The baby bird has to continually scrape the shell as it grows, wearing away the thick layer. Now, once the female lays the eggs, the male is responsible for caring for the nest. He keeps the nest exactly 91 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 months. The chicks will die if the temperature varies too much. So the male keeps the nest at 99.5% humidity. At 80% humidity, the eggs will dry out and the babies will die. So the male is constantly at work on the nest. Sometimes he throws sand up on the nest to achieve the correct temperature. Sometimes he sits on the nest. Sometimes he's scraping stuff off the nest. He's constantly working, and he'll stick his beak inside the nest to check its temperature, its humidity, to make sure everything is just perfect for those babies. And if it's not perfect, he knows exactly what to do. Now, the male turkey is able to know how to keep it at that perfect temperature. At the end of 7 months, the mother and the father turkey completely abandon the nest. Say, okay, we're done. And they go. At this point, the baby hatches. Once the little bird hatches, it spends a total of 3 days on its back, digging its way with its hind legs to the top of the nest. It is the only bird that hatches with all its feathers. Since its mother and father have left before the baby bird emerges, no one trains it how to hunt food, how to build its own nest, but somehow it knows all of this from day one. How? It's pre-programmed in the brain, in the genes of this little bird. Amazing. And you know, the next year, this bird builds its own perfect nest that no one taught him to build, and he's only hatched from a year before. From the egg of the bush turkey to the father knowing just what temperature and humidity to keep the nest, to the little bird being able to function without being taught, is all evidence that evolution cannot explain, but intelligent design fits. These aren't learned behaviors. This is information that is programmed into the very structure of this bird's life cycle, and it all must happen together with the first bush turkey. Now you have the woodpecker. It was designed for hammering trees. The beak of the woodpecker is the strongest of any part of any animal weight to body ratio. There's 2 holes to climb in any direction, or 2 toes to climb in any direction. Its tail feathers stabilize it as it pounds on the tree. It has cartilage in the back of its beak to cushion the blows as it hits the tree, and it opens and closes its eyes every time it hits the tree. That should solicit a wow. And the reason is because, have you ever heard a woodpecker hit a tree? What does it sound like? Brrr, brrr. Like 3, 4, 5 hits in a second. And in between every single hit, the woodpecker closes and opens its eyes. It closes its eyes because when it hits, it hits so hard, it keeps its eyes from bouncing out. It opens its eyes to make sure it knows where it's hitting, which is incredible. Now, the woodpecker tongue is also amazing. It can stretch as much as 10 inches past its beak. It has a barbed spear on the end of its tongue, and with that barbed spear, it pierces and then hangs on to the little insect. Because it can't get its beak all the way down into that hole that it's just pecked. So what does it have to do? It has to spear whatever is down in that hole, and that spear has to be barbed so that it catches the creature and pulls it out. Now, a woodpecker also has glue on its tongue. It produces this glue to be a sticky substance to catch the little insect, and then once it gets it in its mouth, if it doesn't dissolve the glue, the insect is stuck to its tongue. So, it also produces an agent in its mouth that dissolves the glue so that it can swallow the insect. Amazing, again. So it produces a solvent to dissolve the glue. Now, for a woodpecker, I want you to take special notice of how this woodpecker has its tongue. Its tongue actually connects on the very front of its forehead. It wraps around its forehead on either side of its throat there, and then it comes out its mouth. That's how its tongue is connected. That's going to be important when we get to the European green woodpecker. We're getting there in just a moment. So here's the woodpecker dilemma. If its beak isn't strong enough, it breaks and it dies from starvation. Without the cartilage behind the beak, he would receive multiple concussions. Without closing his eyes, he could go blind after the first hit. With the wrong type of glue, the bird's tongue would stick to its mouth, and without something to dissolve the glue, when the woodpecker swallows the bug, he would also swallow his tongue. Now here is the European green woodpecker. Remember I told you about how the tongue attaches to the front of the head and then goes around the beak? Well, with the European green woodpecker, the tongue actually attaches down in its throat. It goes up through a nostril here, back down through its beak and out its mouth. And the reason why this is important is because evolution says that all woodpeckers evolved from one another. And if all woodpeckers evolved from one another, you would think that all woodpeckers would have the same sort of direction for its tongue, starting in the front of its head, going around back, and then coming out its mouth. But the European green woodpecker has a completely different anatomical structure for its tongue, starting in the back of its throat, and then coming up, and then through its nostril and its beak, back down into its mouth and out, which defies evolution. The next animal we have is called the Pacific golden plover. This little bird lives in Alaska and migrates to Hawaii for the winter, something I would love to do each year. Who wants to join me? Let's all go to Hawaii. Shall we do it? All right. In its migration, it is a non-stop 88-hour flight. I'm not sure I want to be on any airplane for 88 hours. But during its flight, it burns 1 gram of body fat per hour. Before its flight, it gains 70 grams before its flight in order to make it all the way there. It flies in V formation. The young make the trip after the parents from Alaska, after the parents leave. So what ends up happening is the parents, they eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until they get to about 70 grams of extra body fat, and the parents don't wait for the young. They just take off. Say, sorry, we're going to Hawaii. They're on their way to Hawaii, but the young have not yet gotten enough calories or enough body fat in order to make that trip. So the young stay behind in Alaska. Remember, they've never made this trip before, and they continue to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until they have the 70 grams of reserve to make the trip, and then they take off, and they arrive in Hawaii exactly where their parents are without ever being shown where to go. How does that happen? I mean, the only way that could happen, in my mind, is if somebody gave these little birds a map in their brain saying, I built you for Hawaii. This is how you get there. Like, you don't have to have ever been there before. This is how you get there. Then we have the gecko. For centuries, scientists wondered how geckos could walk vertically or upside down on walls and ceilings so effortlessly. The gecko foot has these tiny hairs, and you have to magnify up to 35,000 times to see them, but there's these little tiny hairs, and each hair is clumped together. There's 2 of them that are clumped together, and they form like a V. And when those 2 hairs press down, they act, at that microscopic level, they act like a suction cup. So the gecko is able to put its foot down, and all of these hairs are like little cups that are so strong that if the foot wasn't designed just right, the gecko would be permanently stuck. It would be unable to eat or drink or would die on your ceiling without the right foot. But the gecko, with each step, pulls its toes together, popping the seals on thousands of suction cups all at once, and then re-engaging each one of those suction cups as it puts its foot down again. That all has to happen the first time. Now, this is an example of natural selection. There are 1,450 different species of geckos, and only 40% have the ability to climb walls. There is also evidence that some of the geckos have gained and lost and then regained the ability to climb walls over the generations. But the gecko has limits to how much it can do. It's not an example of a gecko evolving into a separate species or even on its way toward a separate species. The information to form wall climbing feet is present in every gecko. It's just not expressed in every gecko. This is natural selection, not evolution. It's kind of like how all of us have our genes from both sides of our parents, but not all of those genes are expressed, but we're carriers. The same principle is there with geckos. 40% are expressing the gene of being able to walk on walls. But the genes for being able to walk on walls are present in all geckos. Again, an example of natural selection, but not evolution. So the earliest discovered geckos from the time of the dinosaurs had the ability to walk up walls. Geckos can lose and regain the ability. The giant ground gecko has the same hair and muscles used by wall climbing geckos. But it doesn't use it to climb up walls. All geckos are covered with tiny hairs that can split on their feet and adapt to wall climbing. If the information wasn't already there, the geckos wouldn't be able to climb the walls. It's information, not evolution, that explains the gecko. Here's another lizard. It's called the chuckwalla lizard. Can you say chuckwalla? Yeah, it's kind of fun to say chuckwalla. Another amazing lizard, chuckwalla, lives in the hot deserts of the southwestern United States. In the hot deserts, salt easily builds up in the chuckwalla system over time. So there's a factory in its nose that will desalt the blood. It then sneezes out salt crystals. If it doesn't sneeze them out, the accumulation of salt will kill the lizard. Now, how did the lizard evolve its salt sneezing mechanism? If desalting was randomly evolved, why did it evolve in this lizard and not others? If it had to evolve to save the lizard from the salt, it would have had to evolve in a single generation before the lizard accumulated too much salt. Otherwise, the lizard would have died, and there goes the evolutionary chain. This is another classic example of intelligent design, the salt crystal sneezing factory. And that had to be there from the beginning. Another amazing creature is the platypus. Platypus have long been hailed as the evolutionist's missing link. A mammal that has the bill of a duck, lays an egg, and has a beaver-like tail, and some reptile characteristics. It was such a shocking discovery that in 1798, when a platypus pelt was sent to Great Britain announcing the news, a scientist came with scissors trying to find where the bill was stitched onto the pelt. However, they finally realized this thing's for real. There are no sutures on this thing. As science continued to study the platypus, they discovered something startling. The bill that looks so much like a duck bill is actually not a bill at all. It's a unique structure like no other animal in the animal kingdom. The platypus swims with its eyelids closed and its nose flaps closed, but is able to find shrimp by detecting them with this highly sensitive bill-like mouth. That bill, can detect electrical impulses from the nerves in a shrimp. When the shrimp's tail twitches, those nerve impulses are detected by the bill of the platypus. Underwater, eyes closed, nose closed. No other mammal has a sensor so highly developed as the platypus. So rather than proving evolution, this discovery proved a truly unique creature that was designed with a unique ability. Scientists tested this theory by putting dead shrimp and then flashlight batteries in the bottom of a pool. And when the platypus dove down into the pool, it went straight for the batteries and ignored the dead shrimp. Another shock to scientists is that the oldest fossils of platypus are nearly identical to modern platypus. The only difference is that the fossilized platypus are bigger and they have an extra claw on the bottom of their feet, which means they've lost genetic information. They haven't gained genetic information over time. We're going to be talking all about fossils and rocks tomorrow, so stay put. We'll be covering some of this at that point. So the only key difference between those platypus that are extinct and those that are alive today, the ones that are extinct had teeth. Somehow along the way, the platypus lost its teeth, also has the claw, and then rather than being evidence for evolution, this reveals a loss of information. Next on the list is man's best friend, dogs. There are over 700 different variety of dogs. The variety in dogs does not prove that dogs are evolving into something else. Instead, it shows that through selective breeding, we can display traits that are hidden in the information system of dogs. No new information is added. Here's an example. You can breed down, but you can't breed up. You can get a bulldog from a mastiff, but you can't get a mastiff from a bulldog because information has been lost. You can breed down, but you can't breed up. Now, if you cross a bulldog and a mastiff, you can get a bull mastiff. But if you just breed bulldogs, you'll never evolve a mastiff because information has been lost. The wrinkled Shar-Pei dog is a small dog body with a large dog skin. Now, Darwin understood this and it puzzled him. Back in England, he was involved in pigeon breeding, and although he was able to get all the varieties, colors, sizes of pigeons, he could never get anything other than a pigeon. It was as if an invisible wall existed with each species that allowed for only so much change, as if variety and adaptation was built into the fabric of species, but that variety and adaptation was confined to the available information in the genetic code. So there was always boundaries in how far he could breed his pigeons. At the time of Darwin, there was an admirer named Ernst Haeckel. Haeckel decided to put together some drawings to support his brand new evolutionary theory. However, he completely altered the drawings of embryos, sometimes simply copying embryos so that they all looked the same. It was all a fraud. At the time of Darwin, he was discovered a fraud in 1884 by his own university, by his own colleagues. Now, to support his case, Haeckel began to fake evidence. Charged with fraud by 5 professors and convicted by a university court at Jena, he agreed that a small percentage of his embryonic drawings were forgeries. He was merely filling in and reconstructing the missing links when the evidence was thin. And he claimed unblushingly that hundreds of the best observers and biologists lie under the same charge. Today, Haeckel's embryos are still used in biology textbooks that are being taught in schools today, even though his embryos, his drawings, were proved a fraud all the way back at his time. But they're still using them today. Scientists claim 180 useless organs are left over in our bodies. They're called vestigial organs. The appendix is an example that scientists used to call a vestigial organ, left over from evolution. You don't need it. If you don't need it, cut it out, right? Scientists now know it aids our body in recovering from infections, lowers inflammation, and much more. You know, for a long time, evolutionary scientists have promoted the idea that if you can live without it, it must be useless. But there are many things that we can technically survive without, but it doesn't mean it is useless. Can you live without hair? How about teeth? How about eyes? How about arms and legs? How about your appendix or your tonsils? Is that all useless? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that your legs or arms are vestigial, useless, or something that evolution just left off on us millions of years ago. It's needed, it's designed, it's purposeful. The different parts of our body were designed to work together in harmony to create optimal function, optimal health, optimal survival. Just because it isn't a vital organ doesn't mean it is useless. Now let's talk a little bit about the monkey to human myth. This myth doesn't come from science, since scientists today say we are more closely related to apes through a common ancestor that has never been found. And the reason many believe we come from monkeys is because 90% of our DNA is similar to monkeys. But can you infer that we came from monkeys because we share 90% of our DNA? You know, there are massive differences between monkeys and humans in that 2% of genes. Some say it's only 95% of DNA. Now, how much information does 2% really represent? 2% represents 60 million letters of coding in your genes. This is enough information to write 20 500-page textbooks. That's 10,000 pages of information difference. In the 98% we share in common with monkeys, it's our physical and mechanical design. We both have arms, legs, eyes, teeth, hair, tongues, fingernail, but our differences include intelligence, diet, social characteristics, fine motor skills, physical differences in teeth, brain size, hands, feet, and then the inclination towards religion, which no animal on earth has. And just so you know, humans share 50% of their DNA with bananas. But this does not mean that we are half banana. As we've covered the evidence together, we have seen problem after problem all the way up the evolutionary tree. But these very problems for evolution are easily solved by intelligent design. All of the problems evaporate when you look at the same picture through the biblical lens of creation. Now, I hope I'm creating in your mind a sense that your faith is a reasonable faith. It's a self-evident faith. It's a scientifically supported faith. As Francis Crick said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but what? They have to keep that in their mind, because what we see over and over and over again is that the heavens declare the glory of God. Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Now, tonight, some of you may feel like science is being shaken out from underneath your feet, especially if you came believing in evolution. Maybe you feel like you have no place to go if evolution is not true, but you do. There's a better belief system that is supported by the evidence. For those struggling with holding on to your views of evolution, may I kindly suggest that you ask yourself a question this evening. What ties me to the theory of evolution? What holds me back? Why wouldn't I go where logic and reason and clear evidence points? And for those of you who believe in creation, I just want to have you have a little bit of, confidence. Because there's so much in this world that says your belief is completely ridiculous. How could you believe that there's a creator? I want you to know that science is on your side. I want you to know that the evidence is on your side. I want you to see that our origins is on the side of a creator God. You don't need to be ashamed of that. You can boldly say, you know what, I believe what I believe because it's what I've seen. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Man, what a lot of great information. Tomorrow we dive into an exciting topic, fossils and floods. We're going to look at evidence from the fossil record and the layers of rocks for a worldwide global flood. And then we'll have another back-to-back session, and we'll take our final presentation. It's called Hidden History, Remarkable Discoveries in Biblical Archaeology. You're not going to want to miss it. Tomorrow night we're going to have those same sheets, or some new sheets, workbooks for you to be able to take with you. It's going to be a great opportunity. And before we end tonight, or just as we end tonight, remember there is a free meal that's been being prepared right next door in the fellowship hall. We invite everyone to enjoy a free meal together. What good is it to come to a place and not get to know one another together, right? So let's eat together, fellowship with one another, and let's close with prayer, shall we? Father in heaven, thank you so much for leading and guiding our discussion. Thank you for blessing us and giving us the evidence we need to know that there is a creator who made heaven and earth. There is someone out there who gave purpose to our life. And I pray that you would bless us as we go from this place and eat together. Bless our fellowship and the friendships we make together. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.